hasn't even started. It's already gotten messy. Sasha Ingber, thank you. Now let's bring in Jamil Jaffer. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Also served as associate counsel to President George W. Bush, handling intelligence community matters. And I ought to say, because we're talking about a federal case, I know you also clerked at the Supreme Court. So, Jamil, I'm glad you're here. I asked this morning, I said, can Jamil come on and talk to us? These documents are still classified. And Sasha was just laying out some of the really complicated particulars here. Who ultimately is going to decide, is this information appropriate for the courtroom?
Well, look, ultimately that decision is going to be made by a combination of the prosecutors who will be asking the questions in court, as well as a negotiation with the various agencies who own these documents and whose documents these are to control. A lot of documents you'll see have a marking on them that says ORCON. That means originator control. So they'll determine whether or not these are appropriate to bring into court. But one would assume, as Sasha pointed out, that the agencies having permitted these 31 documents to be in the charging documents, they're likely to allow those to be used in court just in that classified form as Sasha laid out.
Mm-hmm. So my mind goes to the FISA proceedings of 2016. I know you used to participate in a FISA proceeding. I was reading through your whole CV, and the intel community in 2016, to get access to some of Trump's folks or whatever, said basically, trust us. It turns out it was improperly handled, and I'm thinking, trust us maybe isn't sufficient in a trial setting like this. Can the judge demand, no, you tell me more?
No, it's a fair point. The judge can ask for more information. It's what's called ex parte and in camera. So with just the government there and in behind closed doors. So you could have proceedings that have both sides there in camera behind closed doors with just the judge, and you could have ex parte proceedings where just one side is talking to the judge, explain to them what's going on. In the case of the FISA proceeding, as you mentioned, right, one of the biggest concerns there was you actually had a lawyer who lied, who made up a representation about the nature of one of the individuals who was to be surveilled. That's an unusual scenario, and that's the kind of thing that you assume doesn't happen as a general matter.
Okay. America's allies, America's adversaries will be watching this trial so closely. How is that going to be accounted for, do you think?
Well, look, I think what this demonstrates is that the rule of law is upheld, right? You want the Justice Department to proceed in a way that demonstrates it's upholding the rule of law. You want the court to proceed in the same way. And you hope the defendant proceeds the same way, too. The problem is, of course, this is taking place in a very politically charged environment where you have a candidate for president who's being charged with a crime. First time ever any former president has been charged, much less a candidate rerunning for office. And then, of course, you have a Justice Department whose attorney general ultimately works for the White House. The president who leads the White House also running for re-election. It's a very unusual circumstance, a very challenging circumstance. And that in and of itself is going to make it hard to bring this prosecution and hard for it to retain credibility on both sides as our allies and partners look at what's going on in our courtrooms.
Jamil, any concern about the jury? Because I didn't realize till Sasha was describing it there that the jury will get access to some really sensitive information. If you have a case playing out here in the DC circuit, you're most likely going to get a bunch of people who work for the government or, organizations related to the government. They probably have security clearances here, actually. Any concern about who might be on this jury?
Well, look, that's the nature of our system. We have a system where people get a trial by a jury of their peers, and that's what the former president is going to get here. Of course, that's going to mean if the government wants to bring in classified information, they're going to have to show it to the jury to make a determination, and that does include some amount of risk. At the end of the day, the government's going to have to make that decision about whether to do it or not and take that risk. Now, of course, there are procedures and proceedings that can be brought against somebody who discloses classified information inappropriately. And so hopefully one would assume that the jury here would understand, look, they're seeing a prosecution of a former senior government official, the President of the United States, for improperly storing classified information. Hopefully they take that to heart and don't disclose anything that they learn in the course of these proceedings.
Mm-hmm. Finally, Jamil, do you see a possibility this gets tied up in legal wrangling about even something like what can be disclosed or admitted or has to be tossed out at trial, delaying the trial? Because we know that Trump wants this to happen after 2024.
Absolutely. I think there's every reason for the former president to seek to delay. There's every reason for the Justice Department to try and move this thing along. And there's a lot of legal issues at the heart of this case, in part because you have a former president, you have somebody who had authorized access to classified information. One of his apparent defenses is that he declassified this information. All of those issues, as well as the sensitivity of the materials, whether it should be made public and the like, the jury pool, all these things are going to be hotly contentious, and that will allow the proceedings potentially to go on for many, many months, maybe even over a year, and potentially well past the election in 2024.
Great information. Jamil Jaffer, we needed you tonight, and it looks like you even made time for us in the middle of Pentagon. Are you at Pentagon City?
I am at Pentagon City Mall. I had a little issue with my iPhone, so I was here at the store getting it fixed.
And you always make it happen.